you feel this plant being located just 3.5 miles south of Indian Point Nuclear Power Plant would be a concern of yours in drinking the water from the river. We have a person who knows a lot about Indian Point with us this evening, Manna Greene from Clearwater, and she's going to speak about is Indian Point an issue, and also to talk about higher, bigger energy use as a result of the desalinization plant proposal.
Thank you, and I'm going to... Okay, so this is another view of Haverstraw Bay, and this is facing Indian Point. I put this in as an insert so that you can see that. It's about 3.5 miles across the river. Indian Point is a close to 40-year-old facility, and it's up for relicensing, and the groundwater under the plant is so contaminated from leaks from various fuel pools and other pipes that are leaking, but primarily from fuel pool 1. And fuel pool 1 is the little squat one in the back. That was the reactor that closed shortly after it opened many years ago. Anyway, radioactive water from the plant has contaminated the groundwater under the plant to the point that it exceeds drinking water standards. Well, that wasn't a problem as long as no one was using that source of water for drinking water. There's reservoirs for Peekskill, and Buchanan has wells that are at a higher level. However, the water has been leaking into the Hudson River. There are also planned and unplanned discharges of radioactivity into water and air other than the leaks. There are quite a few communities north of here that do take their drinking water from the Hudson River. In Dutchess County, Poughkeepsie, and I believe Red Hook, across the river in Ulster County, Port Ewan and Highland take their drinking water from the Hudson. And they're able to do that because that part of the water is still fresh water. The salt front in the Hudson goes just south of Poughkeepsie. And so they don't have to use desalination. They do have to filter out any PCBs that are in the water column, and fortunately PCBs can be easily filtered out with a combination of sand and charcoal filters that are not at all energy intensive. And then in Haverstraw Bay, 3.5 miles south of a leaking nuclear power plant, we have found certainly traces of strontium-90, and coming out of the plant are tritium and cesium and other radioactive isotopes. So a very, very careful fate and transport study needs to be undertaken, and that has not been done. It is possible, using reverse osmosis and other technologies, to filter out strontium and cesium. But tritium is tritiated water. You can't filter water out of water. So it will pass through into the water system if it's present in the bay. And the other thing is that the DEIS, the Draft Environmental Impact Study, has not looked at cumulative or synergistic effects. I was a critical care nurse for 22 years. And let's just say you're a fisherman and you actually consume Hudson River fish against the health advisories, and you're taking a little bit of PCBs into your body. Well, that little bit of PCBs can, one of the known effects is that it can lower your immune system. And then you just get a little bit of tritium in your drinking water. And tritium is, as most radioactive isotopes are, carcinogenic. If your immune system is lowered, so this is what I'm talking about. Cumulative effects and synergistic effects are those effects that exacerbate the pathological effects of one chemical when it's in the presence of another chemical or process. So there's a lot of work to be done to really understand this, and those are our main concerns about Indian Point. And I just want to read a quick quote. We are working with Riverkeeper. We have a contention in the relicensing process of Indian Point about this very issue. And we have hired someone who is a fate and transport expert, and she says, in summary, I believe that strontium-90 and cesium that are leaking into the Hudson River via groundwater from under the Indian Point nuclear facility pose a clear and imminent threat to both the ecosystem of the Hudson River as well as potential contaminants for the desal proposed by United Water in Haverstraw Bay, and she goes on. But I want to also talk to you about the energy-intensive properties associated with desalination. Next slide, please. First of all, this picture here demonstrates what's called a thermal plume. This is Indian Point. This was Lovett. Lovett has closed. And I believe, if I'm correct, that Haverstraw Bay is just south of Lovett. So this is also a path for radioactive isotopes. This is a diagram. It's not of Indian Point per se. It's right out of a textbook. But this area here, if this were the source of the leaks into the groundwater under the plant, the primary plume finds its way to the Hudson River. There's also fractured bedrock under that. And so there can be secondary and tertiary sources into the river, moving in this river that flows both ways, a little bit upstream, a little bit downstream, and that means that Haverstraw Bay can actually be sort of recontaminated from that same source. Laurie mentioned impingement and entrainment. Thermal shock is when the fish, the water coming out of the power plant, this is not the desal plant using reverse osmosis, but out of the power plant, which takes 2.5 billion gallons a day of water, is about 15 degrees warmer. On a hot summer day, that can put a fish into shock. So that's thermal shock. Impingement is when a large fish smacks up against the screens of the intake valve. And then entrainment is when the little fish and eggs and larvae get through the screens and get cooked in the system. Well, that 2.5 billion gallons a day, and then it comes down to Haverstraw Bay, where these beautiful Atlantic sturgeon and so many other fish use as a nursery. And that takes another 10 million gallons a day. It exacerbates that problem. Next slide, please. So this is from a study done by the Water Research Foundation, Desalination Facility Design and Operation, a new study, 2011, that I was able to get a copy of. About half of the costs for running these plants are energy costs, the consumption of energy. Reverse osmosis uses a system of membranes, and it's very energy intensive. It is the most energy intensive form of water treatment. And that's shown over here. If you just use gravity filtration, you have a very small consumption. This is your kilowatt hours per 1,000 gallons of water. So, but when you come up into the various forms of desalination, you can see how much more energy intensive that is. And the author of this study says, desalination processes are energy intensive, while extensive use of desalination would potentially result in the development of new power plants using fossil fuels and thereby affecting global climate change and energy requirements of obtaining water from other sources, if at all available, should be considered. I don't know if you can get the bottom of that, but I'd like to show people that. Okay. Well, for the little bit that you can see, and there's a better chart out in the hallway. This is nuclear power, this is coal, this is oil, this is gas, and it's an energy continuum. The transitional technologies are biodiesel and hydrogen, and the clean, renewable, fuel-free sources of energy are hydropower, geothermal, which is really more of an energy efficiency system. This is wind, this is solar, and energy efficiency. Given the threat of climate change, we urgently need to be moving in this direction. This pushes us in that direction. We've spent, up until recently, 98% of our research, development, and infrastructure into these systems, and less than 2%. Now that's changing. There's about 6,000 megawatts of wind either coming online or in the pipeline, and the same increasing amounts of solar, and we just need to transition to that green energy economy. Next. This is another way to look at it. These are the 10 least energy intensive water facilities. This is the average of the 10 most energy intensive water utilities. This is Haverstraw Bay with the stage 1, the pilot, and this is the full build out, and you can see energy consumption, how high that is compared to where we would want to be. If you are still a climate denier, this is Greenland in 2005 and how much of a melting took place in Greenland. That's not supposed to be that way. This was a map of the greater New York metropolitan area showing what a 6-foot rise in sea level will mean. And we have to prepare for that because it's clearly on the way. But we don't have to worsen it with desal. Next. And it wouldn't be Clearwater if I didn't raise the environmental justice issue. And I mentioned that the proposed desal is located 3.5 miles to the southwest of Indian Point, which is leaking radioactive isotopes into the water, strontium-90, cesium, and tritium. It is now a potential source of drinking water. When that plant went to be relicensed, no one was taking the water, but now potentially Rockland County will be taking its drinking water if this plant is not stopped, to generate 7.5 million gallons a day of potable water using reverse osmosis, which is highly energy intensive. And as Laurie said, Haverstraw Bay is an extremely critical habitat which supports endangered Atlantic sturgeon and other declining Hudson River fish. 10 of our 13 signature Hudson River fish are still in decline, despite all of Riverkeeper, Clearwater, Scenic Hudson, and everybody else's efforts. And so that decline has to be stopped, and so Haverstraw Bay has to be protected. I also want to point out the purple areas on this map. Those are what are called potential environmental justice areas. That is, areas that have high rates of communities of color or low income that may be unduly burdened, and that's why they're called potential. Here's Indian Point. Here's the proposed desal facility in Haverstraw. I sort of rest my case, and thank you.